And the river still shines and shimmers in the light as it did in our grandfather's day, when they rode all night to fish in the morning and lived in Willapa Bay.
But here we are at the last hour. And anyway, I MC and presenter, so I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Mary Jacobs. I lived in Kodiak for 40 years. I fished for salmon, halibut, crab, shrimp, and various other things. And starting in 1979, I ran my own seiner. So I did that for till about 2006, and I've retired in Anacortes. And after living on Kodiak, a 12-hour ferry ride, I was really happy to have be on an island with a bridge. and with a lot of Kodiak expats, so we can tell stories and lies to each other to our heart's content. So, and I've been coming here since, I couldn't believe it, I just figured it out. It's either 2006 and 2007, and I don't know that I'm getting any better, but I keep trying. But anyway, this is my first year skipper. It's called Captain Bitch. I was a refugee of years of protesting Vietnam and civil rights in Berkeley, and I dropped out, and I'd fished around Kodiak as deckhand and skiff man with my boyfriend John Finley until taken off to have a baby. But in 1979, I missed salmon fishing. John didn't, so I went without him. 3 women friends, Vicki Vesey, Mary Relier, and Jane Eisman, joined me to fish on the tiny Invader, painted like a Tlingit war canoe, leaving John happily at our Mush Bay homestead with our 2 children, Mary's 2 kids, and Vicki's son. But that's a whole other story. Sometimes I still wonder at my crew enduring months at sea with an unprepared, green, tyrannical skipper on the smallest boat in the fleet, with all of our fresh water in 1 jerry can and no head. My crew hung in there, but I still cringe to think of the painful events they endured. The first time I set my net was a disaster when the boat's exhaust system blew out. I slunk home for repairs. The next week, when I made my second set, a brisk current pushed my net into Floyd Anderson's set net, and I spent the day entangled and then repairing my net and hydraulics. I felt like a screw-up. 2 sets into my career, and both disasters. For this, I abandoned my kids. I'm a failure as a mother and as a fisherman. I couldn't look my crew in the eyes. Before tangling up in Floyd's net, expectations of my success amongst the salmon fleet were underwater. Afterward, everyone heard about my screw-ups, and I felt like a laughingstock. The next opening, patched up again, I approached Packer Spit, where several seiners were rafted together waiting turns. The boys' club requested that we make cinnamon rolls for them. I stared Vitrinoxes at them and found another place to fish. We finally caught our first salmon, and Jane and Mary laughed off our previous mishaps. Returning to Mish Bay after our first successful opening, my 3-year-old redhead, Belika, clung to me and told me that she would never leave me. I tore myself away, promising to return often. As I drove the boat back to our fishing spot, I couldn't stop thinking about her sad eyes beseeching me. I was estranged from the fleet with no relatives and few friends on the fishing grounds. I was lonely and homesick, but determined, and I became obsessed with catching salmon. In doing so, I pushed my crew as John, my role model, had done to me. I bitched, I hurried, I nagged, I complained. I yelled at Mary, "Scoochie the net, the fish are running. We got to get the net back in the water. Do you have to make perfect diamonds every time?" Mary scowled, her sharp chin set in determination. "Remember the net mending contest where I beat all the guys on B-float?" she said. I groaned, grimaced, and tapped my foot while she finished sewing. We worked the long summer days from daylight to dusk. On closure days, I searched for new places to fish. I explored the shorelines of Kodiak and Afognak, looking for jumpers and noting currents. I tuned into the marine forecast and determined where it would be safe to set my net. I noted tender reports, so I knew where fish were showing up, and I made the crew drive all night to get there. The pressure to succeed brought out the worst in me. One time, Vicki was sailing alongside the invader, towing her end of the net to close the circle around our catch. She looked up at me, her ball cap shading her high forehead and her azure eyes. She gave me this dazzling Cheshire cat grin, pointed at the water, motioned that she had seen jumpers in the net. Well, I knew we had fish in the net, but I feared complacency would cause us to lose them, so I barked, "Stop smiling." She laughed in defiance. I seized at her insubordination. Mary cut Vicky's end of the net and secured it to the starboard davit. While we hauled seine, I meditated on what drove me to tell her to stop smiling, and I realized that I was infected with John's paranoia. That other fishermen might notice our excitement and move in on us. It was a little justification for denying Vicky a joyous moment. I blushed with embarrassment at acting so bitchy. Radio gossip referred to us as dykes, hippies, and lesbians. That angered and humiliated me, but for the most part, I kept my head down and worked like my Jewish mother had when she raised my sister and me on her own in Boston. I knew my reputation depended on my success. I wouldn't brag about my catch numbers, or even though I knew we were doing quite well. For the most part, I tried not to give a damn what the other fishermen thought of us. Midway through summer, I wrapped up a boatload. When we got to the money bag, Mary, Jane, and I squatted on the edge of the rail, scooping those brailers full of salmon out of the puckered net. Heaving in unison, we spilled the writhing silver fish against our rain gear-clad legs and into the boat. As the boat filled, thousands of wiggling pink and red salmon tickled our thighs and our lady parts. We giggled with delight. At the tender that night, the skipper looked fearful as I climbed on his boat to sign my fish ticket. I asked the crew what was wrong. "He thinks women are bad luck on boats," the teenager said. "How does he account for my boatload?" I bragged. I was on a roll and didn't want to distract from our good fortune and return home. Unfortunately, that meant I failed to keep my promise to my 3-year-old daughter. I missed her, but dreaded tearing myself out of her arms after a day or two. I could also tell Vicky and Mary were thinking about their kids. Their shoulders dropped as they quietly stared towards the horizon. Even when things were going well, the bitch in me often surfaced. I surveyed the crew's grocery list and objected to buying expensive meat when we had access to 5 types of salmon and bycatch of halibut and crab. I objected to buying candy or coffee. "I don't want to be tempted by candy," I said, and herb tea is better for us. "You can go without caffeine," Mary responded, her blue eyes glinting, her sharp chin set in determination. "I can't. No job is worth going without caffeine. Furthermore, I'm sick of eating fish and rice. If you want me to work 20-hour days, I need a greasy fried chicken or a juicy steak at least once a week." "Okay," I said. "I'll buy chicken tonight." I hoped to appease her. A few days later, The crew slept, and I hand-steered from the bridge, wishing I had an autopilot so I could point the boat towards our destination and get a piece of toast or a bowl of oatmeal. But I couldn't leave the bridge without the boat going in circles, so I steered with one hand, and with the other, I dug under my seat looking for peanuts. A bag of gold-wrapped butterscotch candies startled me. I briefly wondered where they had come from, but wanting to avoid temptation, I tossed them overboard. As I did so, I compared myself favorably with Ed Munkowitz. After all, he threw every dish on the boat overboard in a fit of rage because the dinner dishes weren't done. Afterward, he bought the crew color-coded dog dishes. I never do something that obnoxious. I kept steering, shelling, and eating peanuts, not giving the candy a second thought. Then Jane scrounged under my seat. "Where's my candy?" I threw them overboard. Jane stared at me, an impending squall visible in her eyes. "They're my favorite," she sobbed. "My mom sent them." My cheeks burned. I did not know what to say. I knew I screwed up. She distanced herself from me as far as one could on a 30-foot boat, collapsing on the seine pit and shivering like a landed halibut. I felt like shit. "I'm sorry," I yelled, my squeaky voice sounding like the squawking of a seagull. Vicky climbed out of the skiff and joined me on the bridge. "What happened?" she asked. I confessed my transgression. Vicky shook her head. "You've got to lighten up," she was blunt and honest. "You don't have to be an ass to catch fish." The rest of the day, we hauled our net in silence. There was none of the normal, friendly banter. If we weren't imprisoned on a boat together, I might have walked in the woods, Jane might have played her piano or talked to her mom. We didn't have the means to reset our priorities or to shelve our pain, so we put our heads down and we went through the motions. At the end of the day, and after the fish were unloaded at the tender, we were in our bunks. Mary's reading light dimly illuminated the cabin. Jane was curled away from me in the bottom starboard bunk. Vicky was across from me in the skinny bunk, the foot of which was above the oil stove. Her sock-covered feet perfumed the cabin with foot odor and fish slime. No one was sleeping. Tension poisoned our atmosphere. I knew I had to make a sincere apology. I leaned over. "Jane?" She turned towards me, and I looked into her eyes. "I'm really sorry. I shouldn't have tossed your candy." "It's okay," Jane sighed. The silence hung over us unbroken. I had to say more. I cleared my throat. "I've been known to polish off a bag of candy at a sitting. Would you please keep them hidden in your bunks?" A quiet giggle came from Vicky's bunk, then from Mary's, then from all of us. The tension dissipated. After the incident with the candy, I struggled to reestablish harmony. It's my nature to be bitchy, but I bit my tongue more frequently. Most days we set the net, restacked it, and loaded our fish aboard as comrades. We shared cabin chores and prided ourselves in our efficiency. One night we sat in the cabin together eating my canned venison burritos. "I've got to get over thinking I have to push you guys," I said. Even though John was often fair, he was constantly pushing us and urging us to go faster. He seemed to think he could prod his crew to work harder by calling us names. He even called me a cunt. Vicky nodded. "He called you that?" Jane exclaimed. "Quite a few times," I said. "Even if it made me hurry, it always stung." I worked briefly for a guy who harassed and berated his crew, Vicky said, while washing our plates in a pan of water on the oil stove. Hated it. And it's so nice not to be the maid on a guy's boat. Men expect the women to do all the cooking and dishes. I love the way we share chores. And Jane, as young as she was, said, "You know what I hated?" She dried the dishes and stacked them on shelves, guys taking a tool out of my hand, like I don't know how to use a socket wrench. Mary hung her sweatshirt up above the stove, clipping the damp sleeves to a line. I've never had a problem with sticking up for my rights. I wouldn't let anyone talk to me like that, she said. But then again, I'm divorced. And she collapsed, exhausted, into her bunk. "I sure appreciate you guys," I said, pulling off my boots. "You work your hearts out on your own." I filled up the water kettle and put it on the stove, then crawled into my bunk. I fell asleep to the gentle and comforting snores of my crewwomen. I learned a lot of hard lessons that summer, a lot of what not to do's, where not to set, but mostly how to control the captain bitch in me. Thank you so much. You're a wonderful audience.
White Maine spruce, grain so even, you can almost hear the music now. Sidewood bent in the water steaming, and the easy slide of a dovetail saw. I learned these skills, but no one taught me. I make guitars that others play. Too much rain and darn long winters, but I love the work of a luthier's trade.
Thank you for joining us here to talk about FisherPoets Gathering. Can you tell me your name, please?
I'm Charlie Becker.
Charlie, I am so happy to meet you. Are you an Astoria local, or did you come from?
I'm a dual citizen. I'm from Portland and Astoria.
So you are well qualified to come to the Astoria FisherPoets Gathering.
Plus, I'm an old sailor, so that doesn't hurt.
Oh.
I'm an old Navy sailor.
Perfect.
And I will say it's such a delight. The performances here, more than that, the seminars taught by these real pros, who are real pros at their literal thing, their poetry and the way they present. So there's a great deal for all of us to learn, I think, going through this. I'm also a bit of a mandolin player myself, so I kind of fade in with this sort of thing. It's very artsy too. Yeah.
That's fantastic. And I've heard the workshops are really, really good as well. So I'm glad you're
very good on doing your writing. These guys on the water, evidently they occupy themselves doing their writing. They're really remarkably creative. I'm sure you must observe the same thing. Yeah.
Indeed. Yeah. Charlie, how many years have you been doing this?
I'm about 4 years into this one. Okay, and it is kind of new to me, but about 4 years. But I fit right in, and well, for the most part. But there's really a community of people on the water who come here, and I do feel that most of us don't know what it's like to be on that water out there. So here it is brought for us. We get a sense of it, and I appreciate it. I appreciate that. Yeah.
Well, I know it's only Friday. We haven't had the Saturday performances yet, but what's been your favorite part so far?
I think some of the workshops I attended yesterday, which involved your writing of your content and the telling of your story, because we do have stories, and so much of this really is about stories, and it has broad application for stories of all sorts. And so they teach you how to prompt yourself, how you might get enthusiastic, how to present, and really how to find your voice. I mean, really, isn't that what it is? Most of us want to find our voice in what we do.
You know what? We are so lucky we got to talk to you today. Thank you so much for talking with us.
Thank you. Likewise.
Appreciate it.